That'd be
to
unfair.
112. Where's 112? Hey, so we have 112 and then before Spencer, so this row.
I just see crosses, I can't see anything before.
Actually, Spence, you can go 112.
It's right there. Chanduk is right there.
I don't want him to sit there.
Oh, Rock's over there. It's like, I'm moving. I don't remember. It's like, yeah, Rock's over there.
If Ross sits next to you, can you tell him to be quiet when he's talking to you?
Is that seat reserved if you can sit?
I'm sitting all the way down there.
Actually, no, you're not fucking allowed to sit here.
Forget to silence your phones, okay?
Pushing him back.
soon as they start talking, obviously.
Listen.
Okay.
Yeah, now I know. I tried to rinse this out with the water fountain. It didn't work out too well.
I wouldn't have guessed. That thing just like barely shoots out.
Yeah, no, it barely did, I don't think.
It's like that like ramen broth or stuff.
Yeah, no, it's not gonna come out. All the bathrooms are live.
What do you mean?
Yes. All the bathrooms are live except for the staff.
I mean, it was like
Yeah, they're all live. Probably. Oh, okay.
I didn't.
You sure you didn't have some fun?
Glad to see you. Are you like feeling nervous today? Well, I'm here to
Happy birthday, Nick! Happy birthday, Nick!
I'm Mr. Hogan. So just keep in mind, we might ask you guys to condense a little bit because people are starting to I'm going to do that right now. So jacket? No, so you know whose it is? Is it a friend of yours? Okay. What's yours? Okay. Can I ask you to move 2 seats to the center because people are having trouble finding seats now.
Can
Very good.
everyone just make sure they silence their phones, please?
Thank you.
Thomas.
Can you guys do me a favor? Can I have these guys like condense down a little bit? Will? 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 Can you guys scoot over one? I know it's a little bit, we need to find some more seats, so scoot 1 seat over. 2 seats over. 1 seat right here. 1 seat right here.
Everyone, take a seat. Hi everyone, I'm Julia.
And I'm Eva.
Thank you for coming to our Asian American Culture Day. Asian American Culture Day is an annual school-wide event that AACC organizes. Our goal for this event is to amplify AAPI voices and to showcase the diversity that exists within our community. We are so excited about the opportunity to bring a speaker to our school today.
Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge the multiple recent acts of violence and hate against different communities of color. We recognize the brutality against Tyree Nichols, as well as the AAPI communities affected by the mass shooting in Monterey Park. Our affinity group stands in solidarity with all people of color and communities affected by these tragedies.
Thank you for standing together in solidarity against these and other acts of violence. With that, we will now introduce our speaker.
Nima Avashia is a queer Asian American from West Virginia with Indian immigrant parents. She's a writer and has been a history and civics teacher in the Boston Public Schools since 2003. Her book, Another Appalachia, Coming Up Queer and Indian in a Mountain Place, was named the best LGBTQ+ memoir of 2022 by Book Riot and a New York Public Library Best Book of 2022. In today's panel, she will be sharing her book and her experiences with us and taking questions from the audience at the end. As a reminder, please keep your phones off and give our speaker your full attention.
Hey everybody, thank you so much for having me here with you today. Before I read, I wanted to just kind of do a knowledge check in the room and see if there's anyone in the room that can tell me what states make up the region of Appalachia. Yeah. West Virginia is one of them, fair. Any other ideas of other places besides West Virginia? Yeah, in the back?
Vermont and New Hampshire.
Vermont and New Hampshire as part of Appalachia?
Not really, but like it's more part of New England, but I don't know.
Maybe culturally kind of like Appalachia? Could be. Yeah, go ahead. Kentucky is part of Appalachia, especially eastern Kentucky, yeah. Nebraska is further west, so think about, you've got West Virginia and Kentucky, you're probably kind of thinking that area, yep. Tennessee is definitely part, eastern Tennessee, yep, yep. Arkansas is, I think, deep south of that point. Let's see, we've got 3, yeah. Go ahead. Parts of North Carolina, western North Carolina, definitely. One more state that kind of is really in there. Part of Virginia, yep. And then Ohio is another piece of it. Southeastern Ohio is really kind of the heart of Appalachia. Okay, so what are the perceptions that you have of that area of the country? When you hear about West Virginia and Kentucky and Ohio and Tennessee, and you don't have to hold back because I'm from that area, so I know what people say about that area. What are the perceptions that you have about that part of the country? Way in the back.
Some dude living in the mountains.
People living in the mountains, definitely. Thank you. What else? Racist, okay. Fair. What else? Yep. Said moonshine? Hey, okay, moonshine. People making moonshine in their backyard in a still, yeah. Redneck, yeah. Hillbilly is another word you might have heard. Go ahead, give me one more. Fried chicken, okay. Anything else? Any people who you associate with that area of the country? Yeah. Bluegrass, very much, and country music. Awesome, thank you. I love that music reference, yeah. Dolly Parton, hell yes, that's my favorite. I love Dolly Parton. What, exactly right. Dolly Parton is from the hills and hollers of Tennessee. She's deeply Appalachian. There's a person who just got elected to the Senate from Ohio who likes to brand himself as like the official Appalachian. He wrote a book called Hillbilly Elegy that came out in 2015, 2016. His name is J.D. Vance. And he wrote this book called Hillbilly Elegy, and I was living up here at the time. I've lived in Boston for the last 20 years. I lived in Appalachia before that. And when Hillbilly Elegy came out, all these people in Boston were reading this book and being like, oh my God, I understand where you're from now. I understand the people where you're from now. And I was like, I hate this book. Because J.D. Vance's book and his description of Appalachia doesn't include anybody who looks like me. But there have been immigrants in Appalachia for a really long time. When my parents immigrated to the United States, they came right after 1965. Got any history people in here who know what law was passed in 1965 that changed immigration? Ooh. Yeah, back there, Pat.
Immigration changed. It made it more loose.
Say it again.
Immigration became more loose after 1960.
It became more loose in the sense that prior to 65 there were quotas, right, that said certain amounts of people can come from each country. In 65 the rules changed to say we're going to prioritize people who are high-skilled workers. And we're going to prioritize people who are immigrating who can fill markets in our country where we don't have people to do those jobs. So my dad had gone to medical school and he came to the United States and he was basically told if you're going to work in the United States you need to work in a place where other people won't work. We don't need you to work in the hospitals where American citizens will work. We want you to go and work in the places where American citizens are like, we're not going there. And so my dad ended up in West Virginia. And he wasn't the only one. There was a significant immigration of Asian Americans to rural parts of this country, to Mississippi, to Louisiana, to West Virginia, to Kentucky, to Tennessee, to parts of Ohio, to places where American citizens were like, I'm not gonna do that job. I don't want to be an engineer at that chemical plant. I don't want to be a doctor at that hospital. That's where immigrants were going. And yet when you think about Appalachia, you don't think about immigrants, but there have been immigrants in Appalachia, Asian American immigrants, for a really long time. Similarly, when you think about Appalachia, you might not think that there are black folks in Appalachia. But some of the earliest coal miners were black folks who, once slavery ended, moved up to work in the mines, which were arguably another form of enslavement. It was not good work, but it was the work that people could get. Booker T. Washington is from West Virginia. He was born in slavery, and his family worked at saline salt mines that were along the Canal River, which is where I grew up. All this to say that the way that people perceive Appalachia doesn't match with who's actually there. And I think there's a reason for that. And I think the reason is that all of our power is generated by natural resources in Appalachia. Coal-fired plants are getting their coal from Appalachia. Natural gas is being fracked in Appalachia. We don't have to think too hard about the people who are affected by that if we've reduced them to stereotypes. We don't have to think too hard when there's flooding in Kentucky if we think that everybody who lives there is racist and a hillbilly and a redneck, right? We're just like, oh, whatever, that's happening to you. There were massive floods in eastern Kentucky this past summer, and on social media, there were all these people being like, well, it's your fault. You voted for who you voted for. Nobody deserves to be flooded out of their house. Nobody deserves to die because of who their political leaders are, right? But what happens is we reduce a region to stereotypes, and then it makes it easier to dehumanize them. And so I realized that what people were basing their ideas of Appalachia about were largely things like Hillbilly Elegy, which was on the New York Times bestseller list for 54 weeks, which became a Netflix movie. Don't watch it, it's terrible, but that's where people are getting their ideas. And I realized that the only way that we're going to disrupt those ideas is if we started to write other kinds of stories. So for a long time, I just thought that being from West Virginia was this weird thing about me that no one would ever understand. right? People would just always be like, what? They're not Indian from West Virginia. And then I realized, well, they're only gonna understand it differently if I tell it to them. And that's where this book comes in. So I wrote this book called Another Appalachia, Coming Up Queer and Indian in a Mountain Place. That's about how I grew up at this really weird intersection of Appalachian and Indian in a small town in southern West Virginia. And so I'm gonna read you 2 essays today from this book. One's a little funnier, one's a little sadder. And then I'll just give you some time to ask questions, and you can ask kind of anything you want about the book, about the process of writing it. I'm happy to share with you whatever is helpful to you, okay? All right, I think I might go to the podium for this. Maybe it'll be easier. Is that one on? Is this one on? Okay. So this first essay is called Be Like Wilt, and this is for the basketball fans in the room. I stand on the foul line at the Cross Lanes Methodist Church gym. I'm 9, the only girl playing on an all-boys basketball team. The only brown kid on a team of white boys. My puny arms, thick glasses, and long oiled braids set me even further apart from their wiry muscular bodies and crop blonde haircuts. Why has Carl Bradford chosen me for his team? I wonder about this. His sons are 2 of the quickest, highest scoring players in our local league. In 1988, in Cross Lanes, West Virginia, there is no designated league for girls. And when I try out one Saturday in October, there are only 2 other girls in the gym with close to 80 boys. Tryouts in this pre-hyper-competitive era involve dribbling up and down the court and shooting 2 layups and a couple of foul shots. Every kid is guaranteed a space on a team. The question is simply which coach will choose to take them on. Each girl is selected for a different team. Some teams have no girls. Mr. Bradford doesn't have to pick me, but he does anyway. In doing so, he also takes on the responsibility of chauffeuring me to and from practices and games. Basketball is not a sport my immigrant parents understand, and the parental time commitment it requires is not something their lives leave space for. By opting to play, I take a step further away from my nuclear family and closer to my West Virginia community. Still, my Indian genetics make me short, weak, and terribly uncoordinated. When I shoot the ball overhand, it falls short of the basket by several feet. When I play defense, my teammates say I look like a praying mantis, my hands weaving in front of me instead of out to the sides. I love the game, but I'm about as far from a natural talent as my parents' hometown in India is from this gym at the end of Frontier Drive. One evening, Mr. Bradford proposes that I shoot the ball a different way. Not overhand, as I've been trying to, but underhand. Granny style, my teammates disparagingly call it. Some of the greatest basketball players of all time shot underhand, Nina, Mr. Bradford says. Wilt Chamberlain shot underhand. His blue eyes, magnified by round, wire-rimmed glasses, probe mine. In my adult life, I have listened to entire podcasts about the accuracy of the granny shot, about how Wilt Chamberlain scored 100 points in the one game where he shot free throws underhand. And Rick Barry's career free throw percentage was a chart-topping 89.3 because he opted to do the same. But at age 9, I feel like this is yet another way in which I'm being set apart from my peers. Raised by fathers who were players of the game, taught to play at driveway hoops as soon as they could walk, they can shoot overhand, I cannot. How do you assimilate into the dominant culture when your own culture is so invisible to the majority? My small group of Indian peers and I answer this question in different ways. The only Indian boy at my elementary school, who all the white kids either think is my brother or insist I should date, speaks with an exaggerated twang, drinks heavily through high school, and loudly votes Republican later on. Some of the Indian kids who live in the city of Charleston emulate their wealthy white classmates, picking up tennis or golf as entry points into American culture. As for me, I choose basketball. I play the sport constantly, watch it obsessively on the TV in our basement, and rock my satin, turquoise and purple Charlotte Hornets jacket daily. And not simply because I love the game. I do, but basketball is more than just a sport to me. It's my way in a world where I otherwise don't seem to belong. I blush hard at the suggestion to shoot underhand, dribble a basketball against the white linoleum flooring of the gym, and stare at the black curve of the key instead of making eye contact with Mr. Bradford. I know he's right, but I'm not sure I can find the courage to shoot granny style in a game where all my teammates and classmates from school will be watching. Much later in his career, Chamberlain explained why he only shot underhand for one season and reverted to the less accurate overhand free throw afterward. I felt silly, like a sissy, shooting underhanded, he said. I know I was wrong. I know some of the best foul shooters in history shot that way. I just couldn't do it. Even though I haven't heard this explanation in 1988, I struggle with the same sentiment. Eventually, however, my desire to make a basket overwhelms my fear of judgment. I get the ball into my hands, and I position the ball between my legs before hurling it upwards. Swish. It isn't a buzzer beater. It's not the game-winning shot. It is just 2 points scored midway through the third quarter in a regular season game. But the entire gym erupts in cheers, the crowd chanting my name. Someone even calls my mom from the payphone in the corner. I grow so dizzy with this temporary but overwhelming sense of belonging that I fail to register the final score. After the game, Mr. Bradford gives me his slow, sweet smile. See, Nima, it doesn't matter how you shoot the ball, it just matters that the ball goes in. Mr. Bradford drafts me for his team each of the next 3 years. At the end of my last season, he persuades all the coaches to jointly award me the league's heart. When I age out of his league, he recruits me as an assistant coach for his younger son's team. His red Jeep Cherokee is a fixture outside our house at least 3 days a week as he continues to drive me to and from practices and games. Each evening after practice, we drive over Golf Mountain. The headlights of the Jeep cast the only light on the dark and winding road that takes us past a pungent chemical landfill and through a dense stand of trees. Close your eyes now, he commands as we approach the summit of the mountain. In the back seat, the boys and I giggle and grin, close our eyes, take a deep breath. Mr. Bradford hits the gas and we soar over the first hill, our stomachs dropping, roller coaster style. The Jeep bounces hard on the concrete, then takes flight again as we hit the second decline. For this brief moment, we are Bo, Luke, and Daisy in the general league. Our screams of delight replace the sounds of Dixie in this reimagined Dukes of Hazzard, and I'm wildly, freely American in a way I can never recapture outside of Mr. Bradford's presence. And then I'm going to read you one more. This one's a little bit heavier, but I think it's important in the context of the spike in violence that we have seen in our country since 2016 towards people of color. I think that it's important to kind of keep this conversation in our heads at all times and think about what we're doing to combat it. So this essay is called Our Armor, and it has 3 parts. 1. My mother's morning preparations always took the same form. She emerged from the bathroom after her shower, the air around her perfumed by a heady mix of talcum powder and baby oil. Dressed in a blouse and petticoat, the softness of her belly just spilled over the tightness of the drawstring waist. From my perch on her bed, I watched her get ready for the day ahead, following her movements through her reflection in the mirror. First, she mercilessly attacked the knots in her waist-length hair with a plastic comb, then used her slender fingers to divide the hair into 3 equal sections, which she braided without looking, only pulling the braid over her shoulder when her arms could no longer reach far enough down her back. Next, she wrapped a sari around her body, pleating and draping 6 yards of silk with a tailor's precision. Last, she put on her ornaments, thin gold bangles that jingled solidly on her wrists, small gold hoop earrings, a black and gold pearl Mangalsutra around her neck, a black mascara chanlo on her forehead. Ensemble complete, she stepped out of our home and into the wilds of small-town West Virginia. In such a foreign context, she opted to own her foreignness rather than hide it. On her walks to school, at her job as an accountant, during her service on the board of the local library, as a troop leader for the Girl Scouts. The chanlo was a marker of marriage for Indian women of my mother's generation. It has many names. Tilak and bindi are 2 of the most common, but in Gujarati, chanlo is the preferred one. Placed between the eyebrows at the site of the 6th chakra, it's said to represent the 3rd eye and the notion of hidden wisdom. Indian women in India mark their heads with vermilion powder or with tiny stickers in a multitude of shapes, colors, and designs to match each of their saris. For my mother, none of those options were available. There was no Indian grocery store where she could purchase vermilion or sheets of chanlo stickers. So she did what immigrants in America always do to survive. She modified, bought mascara from Rite Aid, perfected the art of drawing a tiny black circle on her forehead with a fuzzy, curvy brush, never left the house unmarked. By midday, the chanlo would begin to crust, crumbled bits of mascara landing on her cheeks or chin. My mother carried her mascara in her purse. Even at the height of tax season, with its 16-hour workdays, at the first sight of crumble, she would take a moment to go to the bathroom, wash off the remains of the mascara, and reapply, determined to keep her third eye intact. I used to think my mother was an embarrassment. Her silky clothes and glittering jewelry contrasted so sharply with the hairspray stiffened perms and acid-washed mom jeans of my classmates' mothers. Our brownness in a white world already marked us as other. Why did she need to heighten the distinction? In Jersey City around the time, white supremacists, self-proclaimed dot busters, chased Indian women down the street, beat them when they caught them. The way to stay safe, I thought, was to blend in. And my dazzling mother, dazzling in both her style and her personality, never blended into the bland linoleum and polyester environs of 1980s West Virginia. I shushed my mother when she spoke to me in Gujarati in public, its pitch and tone so different than that of English. Speak English, I would demand, refusing to acknowledge her if she wouldn't. Children can be so cruel, the saying goes, and I was living proof. I curse my cruelty now when I can't find the vocabulary in Gujarati to communicate complex ideas. Or when I wear a sari and my mother's stinging response is that I look weird because she can't reconcile my short hair with traditional clothing. I want to believe that my message of assimilation, pushed so strongly on my mother, was born of my need for safety, both my own and my mother's. But the safety came at tremendous cost. My mother's saris now gather dust in her closet, only worn on the most special of occasions. 2. Pamela Circle was never a flag-waving neighborhood in the 80s and 90s. My neighbors' yards did not boast flagpoles. Their porches lacked flag holders. Flapping American flags were flown in schoolyards, not front yards. Flapping Confederate flags were flown in yards in other neighborhoods. I learned very early not to trespass through. But on my street, the main morning sounds were those of birds chirping and basketballs pounding on the pavement, not red, white, and blue bunting flapping in the breeze. Until late September in 2001, that is, when my parents took a trip to Portland, Oregon. They sat in their rental car at a stoplight downtown when a group of white men approached, banged on the hood, and rocked the car. The men screamed epithets and curses, and the favorite phrase of white supremacists everywhere hurled at those of us who are not white. Go back to where you came from. The light changed. My father slammed the gas pedal, charging forward, unconcerned about whether he ran over anyone's feet in the process. Later that same fall, on a Greyhound bus in Logan, West Virginia, less than an hour from our home, white passengers tackled an older Indian man and pinned him to the floor. They viewed his frequent trips to the bathroom as suspicious, instead of being the result of a failing prostate. They only removed their knees from his back when police arrived to take him off the bus. For 25 years, precisely the same amount of time he had spent living in India, my father had worked to make West Virginia feel like home. And then, any glimmer of insider status he had gained in 2.5 decades evaporated between the hours of 8 a.m. and 9 a.m. on September 11, 2001. After their trip, my father promptly went to Castro Hardware and purchased a massive American flag decal emblazoned with the saying, "Proud to be an American." He taped it to our glass front door, leaving sticky residue marks of many crooked attempts before he felt satisfied that it was straight. Another flag got taped into the back windshield of his blue Toyota van. A third got placed in a holder on the porch. 640 miles away in Madison, Wisconsin, I compulsively went across the street every afternoon to check on the Punjabi Sikhs who ran the gas station, using them as a proxy for my parents. 4 days after 9/11, Balbir Singh Sodhi, a Punjabi man my father's age, was murdered at his gas station in Arizona by Frank Silveroque, a white supremacist who shouted, "I'm a patriot and I stand for America all the way," when arrested. Sodhi's brown skin and his turban were all it took for him to be interpreted as a threat, as a terrorist, as someone whose murder was justified. I did not believe my father's flags would keep him safe, but I could not ask him to take them down. I struggled with his assertion of patriotism towards a country that had only shown me ambivalence regarding my existence, and simultaneously lived in fear of what might happen to my parents if the Confederate flag wavers of other neighborhoods found their way onto our street, so profoundly apolitical and welcoming up to this point. My parents' professional lives as doctors and accountants may have buffered them from the worst of West Virginia's ugly racism before 9/11. I, on the other hand, felt its effects from the age of 6, when a chubby, rat-tailed kindergartner approached me in the schoolyard, slapped me across the face, and hit me with the ugliest of racial slurs, illustrating that in West Virginia there were only 2 categories that seemed to matter when it came to race: white and not white. And again, when fans of the opposing middle school basketball team screamed, "Mr. Miyagi" and "Speedy Gonzalez" and "Where's your papoose" each time I walked onto the court, showering me with trash and epithets, then pissed on our school bus at the end of the game. And again, when a high school classmate with his heavily gelled mullet and black Metallica t-shirt pulled over his enormous belly called me camel jockey every day during shop class, and our teacher pretended not to hear him. Until 9/11, my parents did not question their belonging in America. America provided them work, wealth, the opportunity to live a kind of life impossible to imagine in India, and to bring family members in India into its slowly growing middle class. Meanwhile, I, exposed daily to the ugliest manifestations of American ignorance, received continual reminders that I did not belong. If the flag could protect my parents from this venom, and from the thick, incapacitating doubt that such venom shuttles to the brain, I would not ask them to take it down. 3. I can't remember when I began to openly flaunt my West Virginia roots, to wear t-shirts emblazoned with images of West Virginia and the lyrics to Country Roads, to proudly share every historical and cultural factoid I had collected during my time living in the state and have continued to collect after leaving. I can, however, remember the first time a white man in West Virginia told me, "Go back to where you came from," at a gas station in Sissonville in the fall of 1995, in between chugs from his 40-ounce beer bottle. And the second time, on the side of the road in Nashville, Tennessee, in the summer of 1996, screamed out a car window. And the third time, at Ogilvie Park in Wheeling, in the fall of 1998, when a leering cowboy held up his hand and said, "How?" mocking a Lakota greeting. He asked me what tribe I was from, and when I responded that I was not that kind of Indian, proceeded to spit hate in my face. And again, in the summer of 2019, when the newspaper headlines announced that President Trump scolded a group of black and brown congresswomen using that very same phrase. I hate the way my body responds to acts of racism. Where others are able to stay calm and unaffected or angrily fight back, I simply disintegrate. My eyes blur, my temples pound, and I catalog counter-arguments in my mind, but my dry mouth, the fear squeezing my chest cavity, prevents me from saying a word. I want, in those moments, to assert my Americanness, my West Virginianness, to pull out the birth certificate detailing my birth at Thomas Hospital in Charleston, West Virginia, in the heart of the Kanawha Valley. That muddy river valley, those green mountains, those smoking chemical stacks, they are where I come from. So much so that I'm writing this essay in a room in my house entirely dedicated to the state of West Virginia. The walls are decorated with a wedding ring quilt, a painting of the New River Gorge, and a map of West Virginia that dates back to the 1880s. My light source is a lamp from the Blanco Glassblowing Factory in Milton, 20 minutes from where I grew up. I want to show my doubters that I'm an expansive encyclopedia of knowledge about West Virginia, most of which I learned in my 8th grade West Virginia Studies course, or have memorized from the actual West Virginia Encyclopedia, my favorite coffee table book. Do you know your state bird and animal? Mine are the cardinal and the black bear. Can you name every celebrity to come out of your home state? Chuck Yeager was born in Myra long before he flew his plane so fast that he broke the sound barrier. Jerry West was from Cheyenne, our Zeke from Cabin Creek, years before he made the NBA All-Star team 14 times. Walter D. Myers was born in Martinsburg before he became a phenomenal writer for young adults. Henry Louis Gates Jr. and his brilliant brain spent their formative years in Kaiser. Randy Moss first played football in the backyards of Brand, and Lou Holtz did the same in Follinsby. And Jennifer Garner wasn't born in West Virginia, but she lived there for most of her childhood before kicking ass on ABC's Alias, where her code name on missions was often Mountaineer. There are Americans whose ancestors have lived in the same state for centuries who don't always know as much about their states as I do. This is a fact. And it is also a fact that knowledge is not the marker of belonging in America that I want it to be. When congresswomen born and raised in the United States are being told to return to the places they came from on the basis of their skin color and their last names, I find myself questioning when, or whether, our country will ever see people who look like me, my parents, or my child as American. In the absence of a body that knows how to effectively respond to racism, I wrap myself in my home shirt with the state of West Virginia replacing the O, in much the same way that my mother wrapped herself in 6 yards of silken sari, or my father wrapped himself in the US flag, as though fabric can protect us, as though fabric will make it impossible for angry men to see through the cloth to the skin below. Thanks. I'm happy to take questions if you've got them. I see one. Yeah, friend with the hat in the back, go for it.
Did you know that West Virginia has a long history of labor strikes and leftism?
I can't hear. I'm gonna wait for the mic because I can't hear you.
Did you know like West Virginia had like a long history of like labor strikes and left-wing politics?
Yeah, you know what's crazy is we didn't learn about any of that in school when I was growing up. So Blair Mountain, which is the site of the largest interracial labor uprising in American history, was an hour from my house, and we never talk about it in school. Right? And I think there's something to think about there. Like, why wouldn't we be taught that black and white miners work together to fight back for like justice? That was completely left out of what we learned in school. So I learned it later, right? But I learned it kind of on my own, outside of the context of school, which I don't think is unconnected to some of the things that we're seeing right now with politicians trying to control what people can access and learn in school. Right? Because if you don't learn that history and you don't know about that solidarity, that changes how you see people and think about people. So I'm super proud of that history, but it was denied to me in the context of my education, and I spent a lot of time thinking about why. But I'm glad you know it. That's awesome. Yeah.
How did your queer identity affect you growing up? And then, like, can you talk a little bit about intersectionality and race?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I was growing up in West Virginia in the 80s, which is at pretty much the height of the AIDS epidemic, right? And so my experience of the way people thought about and talked about queerness was either there was a lot of silence or there was a lot of fear. And so what that meant for me is I spent a lot of time growing up feeling like I didn't fit, but I ascribed all of that to race, because race was the obvious category on which I didn't fit. As I got older and came to understand, met people who were queer and like realized that about myself, really after leaving West Virginia, I was able to kind of go back and re-look at my experiences growing up and be like, oh, that might have been race, but it also might have been queerness that was happening there, right? I feel like it's really different than it is now. Now there's a lot of visibility on queerness, and I think in a lot of ways that helps young people to come into their identities much more quickly than people did when they were my age. I think that for me, like, it just was, there was so much silence that it was like this forest that you were like bushwhacking. You were like, you didn't know where you were going. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what was happening. I just felt like, I don't fit, but I don't know why, was like my dominant experience. And so I describe it as kind of like bushwhacking, right? It was just like constantly trying to make a path because I couldn't see what the path was. I feel like that's very different now in ways that I'm really glad for. But I also think that over time, like, it's helped me to really think about intersectionality and like, what does it mean to live at this intersection of like queer and South Asian and Appalachian? That is a corner that not a lot of people sit at. But it makes me feel like I have a lot of responsibility because I can see all three of those identities and I can understand how they actually can be held together. That I have the ability to sort of share with people and help them integrate the parts of their identity as well, right? And so when I wrote this book, for me, it was the first time that I was able to kind of like make all those pieces of my identity cohere and be like, oh wait, all of these things, they go together. They're not disparate from each other. When I've gone to Appalachia and I've talked to young queer people there, even though most of them are not South Asian, I think for them it helps so much to see a book where the intersections they live at, or at least some of them, are mapped out on the page. And I think it's why it's so important that we have stories that are intersectional, because most of us live intersectional lives. Very few people are one thing, right? But a lot of the narratives we get are about one thing. And so I find myself to be really hungry for intersectional stories, and I think lots of people are, because we're all trying to figure out how do we balance the different beliefs and values and ideas of the different communities and cultures that we're a part of, and how do we make all of that make sense in the context of who we are. And so I think just like if you're a writer, if you're a storyteller, if you're a poet, if you're a photographer, whatever arts you sort of, if you're a musician, like thinking about how you feel free to map your intersectionality in your art feels really important to me. You don't have to be one thing. Your story doesn't have to be about one thing. All of us are more than one thing, and we should be able to tell stories that hold all of that. When I was publishing this book, though, it was very hard to publish because publishers wanted a book that was about one thing. And so that is, I think there's still a pressure to sort of like reduce your identity down in a way that there shouldn't be. Yeah? Oh, yeah. All right, no problem. So that's the last one, or we have, or? All right, yeah, sorry, go ahead. It's been mix. It's complicated. West Virginia is passing some of the most anti-LGBTQ, anti-BIPOC legislation that exists in this country right now. So at a policy level, going home feels like going to a place where people don't want me to exist anymore. At the human level, every time I go back, I meet people of color, I meet queer people who are living in those places and fighting to stay in those places and fighting to make those places a place that they can call home and not wanting to leave, right? Not wanting to feel like I have to go away to be who I am. And so that reminds me of how important it is that when I come to a room like this, that I remind people that there are queer people in Appalachia and there are Black and brown people in Appalachia and they deserve our empathy and care just as much as anyone else does.
Thank you so much. That reminds us. Thank you all for joining us today during our B-Block of Asian American Culture Day. We look forward to seeing you on Saturday, May 6th for Asian American Culture Night. And if you're interested in joining AACC, we meet every Tiger Block in room 3.
Please reach out to any of us officers through social media or email if you're interested in joining and learning more about Asian American culture and identity. Thank you.